again, we're so excited to have all of you here on Friday Eve, aka Thursday night, when so many of you could be doing everything else, but you decided to be here with the most wonderful author, Sahar Mustafah. So I thank you from the bottom of our hearts here at Emerald, also on behalf of Utah Humanities, and for Sahar as well. Let me go ahead and dive into what Emerald Project is and why I'm moderating for those of you who don't know who or what Emerald Project is. So Satine, Faiza, and I started Emerald Project in the wake of the Muslim ban. And long story short, we were in my living room, and instead of complaining about things, we decided to make a change by taking action. We started with a 3-part series right after the Muslim ban. It was passed in January 2017. By February 2017, we had our first event of our 3-part series called Is Islamophobia Real?, where we invited Muslims and non-Muslims alike to come together and have a candid conversation about maybe why you think we're terrorists, why do we wear a cloth on our head, you know, what are the similarities between other religions, why do you fear us? And then also Muslims had an opportunity to come and use their voice and speak their truth, and not just what was propaganda or shown via media or policies or lawmakers. So now, we never planned for it to become a nonprofit, let's get that clear, but you know, amidst such hate in the world going on at that time, something beautiful came about it as well, which just shows for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So I'm so thankful this led to Emerald Project, and today we are focused on 5 goals, which is uniting the Muslim community in Utah, 2, promoting the accurate use of information regarding Islam and Muslims, 3, exploring the Muslim identity, 4, making it easier for Muslims to practice Islam, and last but not least, making Utah a more welcoming home to Muslims. So thank you so much for being here today. And if you have any questions about Emerald Project or the work we do, feel free to visit our website, www.emeraldproject.org. Now let's move on to the lady of the hour, Sahar Mustafah. I'm going to go ahead and introduce her real quick. So the daughter of immigrants, Sahar Mustafah explores her Palestinian heritage in her writing. She earned her MFA in fiction from Columbia College, where she was a Follett graduate scholar. Sahar is a Willow Books Grand Prize winner for Code of the West, was named one of the 25 writers to watch by the Guild Literary Complex of Chicago, and is a member of Voices, Protest, and Radius of Arab American Writers. Her new novel, The Beauty of Your Face, was named one of New York Times notable books of 2020. Sahar writes and teaches outside of Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Sahar.
Thank you.
And Sahar, before I ask you the official questions, this is an Emerald Project tradition. Anyone who's been to our events knows we love to ask get to know you questions or do icebreakers. So my question for you is a 2-parter. The first part of my question is, what is one of your favorite books of all time that you can simply read over and over again? And the second part of my question is, what is a fun or interesting fact about yourself?
Super questions. And, you know, I immediately heard what was my favorite book, but when you added over and over again, I realized, you know, there are a few books that I read over and over again, except for maybe 2 of my favorites at this point in my life is Sula by Toni Morrison, and I would say In London by Hanan El-Sheikh, a Lebanese writer. And I love those 2 books for different reasons, but Sula has probably affected me the most, I think, maybe as a human being before I discovered Arab American writers. So I was like, you know, many adult students who did not get exposed to Arab or Muslim, and actually many writers of color until, for me, even post-college. So those discoveries came on my own. But Sula really just stays with me as a woman of color. It's a beautiful book. It's, I believe, her shortest book, and it's just packed. Hanan El-Sheikh, you know, I was introduced to her through translated books, but In London was her first written in English. And I loved it because it was a short story collection, which I started in that genre first in my career. And she was one of the first Arab writers who I felt was, and to use your term, Nora, writing her truth. And so it felt like she was really pushing the boundaries and really dispelling the stereotypes, especially around Arab women. But then she also, she had a gay character in that novel. And I have to say, it was the first time I'd ever seen that representation. So I would say that those two have continued to stay with me, you know, on these different levels. So something interesting about me is that I am kind of a celebrity monger. So I'm always like on the lookout, and I have great stories. I'll share one. I met Queen Latifah in Canada, and I'm sorry, in California. And I sort of ran after her when I discovered that it was her, and she was great, but she wouldn't take a picture with me. So it's like my Queen Latifah, you know, snubbing me story, which I think is even more interesting. But she was gorgeous. So she was just this towering, you know, woman, and she had an aide with her, and it was actually her assistant who was sort of making sure that there was distance between us. And I've met a few other cool celebrities, including Al Pacino, who's my first, but I feel like he's just not as celebrated. I'm going to be 50 soon. But I met him at a wonderful English conference, and he had done this Shakespeare project, and I was in the front row. That was before the smartphone, so I didn't even know what the picture looked like. It was a disposable camera, and it was this great photo of me just like, but he had turned away at the last minute to talk to one of the hosts, and people teased me about that not maybe being him. But that would be maybe something interesting about me.
That's amazing. And you know what? It's her loss if she didn't take a picture. And this was pre-pandemic days. She didn't want to get close or take a picture.
You know what I think it was, and I totally respected that. It taught me a lesson too about just leaving people alone. She was not wearing makeup. She was in jogs. And I think it was one of those things that she knew could instantly be posted, right? And I want to say that was probably even before I was on Twitter. It would have just been Facebook glory. But I really appreciate that. So, you know, I say that jokingly. She was so kind. She shook my hand. I would have loved a hug, but even that taught me there are boundaries. So it was all good. It was really a great experience.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. And maybe next time a way around that, you can say, hey, take a picture of me. And I can say, Latifah took this picture of me. But yeah, and also disclaimer, before we get into the questions, Sahar and I swear to God, we did not coordinate. We both ended up wearing black turtlenecks, red lips, and our curly hair is out. So this was not planned whatsoever. We're on that Palestinian vibe wavelength, but just to get that out of the way. And I have to give a shout out to the Palestinians who joined us in this Zoom call. Thank you so much. Mona Omar, I see you with the beautiful Dome of the Rock in the back. Thank you. Yeah, she's a huge fan of yours. And thank you everyone else for joining. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the live reading. Sahar is going to be reading a passage of her choice from The Beauty of Your Face. And again, don't worry if you haven't read the book, you can still follow along and participate. We've crafted the questions in a way that if you have read the book, it's of course knowledge or things that you may already know and have more insight. And if you haven't read the book, you'll still be able to grasp the conversation and participate in it. So go ahead, Sahar. Thank you.
Thank you. And, you know, I just want to say thank you to Utah Humanities. It's been such a wonderful collaboration. I didn't think, you know, we would be together again, and it now just feels like a friendship. So thank you for having me in this space. I want to thank Willie, you know, who was the first to reach out to me way back when. And, you know, I'd been like a pandemic book, and you really supported me. Noura, it's been great knowing you also in the space. And then everyone who's joining tonight, and especially Emerald Project. I am just so in awe, and I admire so deeply your mission. It feels like, you know, I'm in familiar like company. So thank you for that. So here's what I thought I would read. Just the ending of one chapter, which is February after 9/11 hits. And then I'm just going to read one more page that immediately follows. My main character, Afaf, is on her way to Hajj, and she actually does not want to go because of 9/11. So she wants to cancel this trip. And in 2002, it happened in the winter, at least, in the United States. So it was February. And this is the scene at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. Please undress to your undergarments. Afaf strips down to her long slip. A beautiful woman stands across from her, her white cotton bra and half slip gleaming against her black skin. She looks over at Afaf, her eyes impassive. Afaf closes her eyes as another female officer waves a metal detector over her body. Her face flushes hot with humiliation, perspiration gathering between her breasts. This isn't like a visit to the doctor's office for her annual pap smear, or crouching among the Muslimat at the communal washroom to perform wudu. She suddenly sees with the terror of being exposed. What if the partitions topple over, 100 strangers gawking and pointing at her partial nakedness? I'm going to be sick, Afaf tells the officer. The vomit heaves from her throat and she retches into a wastebasket someone quickly hands her. No reason to be nervous, ma'am, unless you've got something to hide, the officer says with a sneer. Afaf squeezes her eyes shut again as her stomach churns. When she can finally dress again and is permitted to fasten her hijab, Afaf is physically drained. A trickle of bile is tickling her throat. The officer leads her out of the makeshift room and she immediately spots Bilal and Baba. They wave and she catches more steely stares as Bilal hugs her. She bites her lip, refusing to cry. Are you all right? She nods, forces a smile. I need to use the restroom. She walks around a custodian mopping the floor and splashes cool water on her face. She catches a woman next to her staring at Afaf's reflection in the mirror, unsmiling. Afaf stares right back, defiant. The woman drops her eyes, lathering her hands noisily. When she passes behind Afaf, the woman flicks water at her headscarf. Shame on you, Afaf snaps back. What have I done to you? What has she done to any of them? Is she not a citizen of this country like them? How naive to believe she's ever really belonged, with or without her hijab, before and after a terrorist attack. You're all evil, bitch. The woman's awful words trail behind her like streaks from the custodian's dirty mop across the tiled floor. The other women quickly rinse their hands, herd their young children out, roll their luggage past Afaf, not looking her way. One snickers before closing her stall door. Afaf leans against the mirror, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. She wants to ask these strangers how she, one woman, a mother and a wife, a teacher, if they'd only ask, can be a menace to them. How can she make them unafraid? She lets the tears roll. Are you all right, miss? An old white woman pats Afaf's shoulder. I'm fine. The woman turns on the faucet next to her. Human beings can be awful. She smiles kindly at Afaf in the mirror. Will this be life from now on? Afaf asks her. The woman is silent, gives Afaf a weak shrug, and dries her hands. The first time Afaf felt amen in her belly, it was like a delicate flutter of wings. A tiny human being was growing inside her, absorbing her nutrients, quietly thriving. The pain of his birth was so extraordinary, then instantly, miraculously, it halted as soon as he slipped out, and she'd been lightheaded with euphoria. But in this place, no earthly experience has prepared Afaf for the holy city of Mecca, a marvelous clash between antiquity and modernity. Lavish hotels break up the desert sky. Cars speed along busy highways driven by men with women clad in black niqab, only their eyes staring back at Afaf. A gigantic clock tower, its ticking mechanism designed to last 100 years, stands outside of the Masjid al-Haram, where Abraham almost sacrificed his son before an angel of God intervened. And I'll just pause there.
Thank you, Sahar. That was beautiful. So let me go ahead and start with this first question. What obstacles have you faced as a Muslim author?
This book in particular revealed a lot of interesting things to me in terms of mainstream publishing. So my first book, the short story collection, was published by an indie press that was devoted or is devoted to writers of color. So it was a completely different experience. You know, they wholly supported, you know, my vision. When I was querying agents for this book, because I felt like it deserved a mainstream audience, you know, so you know, I decided I was going to really, you know, push this, and I'd sort of given myself, you know, a time frame of how many times I would submit. But anybody who's a writer knows that you need to get an agent first if you're going to make it into those big publishing houses, unless, you know, you're going through other circuits, maybe word of mouth or maybe some contests. So I was querying to agents mostly. And they wanted me to drop the shooter frame. And people who have heard me talk in spaces like this, they've heard the story. But I have to say, it's something that stays with me and has really, you know, given me that what used to be like an anecdotal story from other writers of color and Muslim writers in terms of, you know, white gatekeepers wanting to control the narrative. So I realized that they weren't pushing back on the Muslim story. I have to say that they loved the Afaf story, but what they wanted to do away with was the violence against Muslims. And that was the thing I wasn't having. So, you know, I wouldn't budge on this. So they wanted to package this as, you know, here is an immigrant narrative, you know, about getting to know Muslims and really in that way embracing it, but then also othering it, I felt, which I think, you know, still continues maybe to happen. So I really had to stand my ground, and I finally, you know, found an agency that really just embraced this book, and I was happy to see that they also represented an Iraqi writer who wrote this fantastic book called The Frankenstein of Baghdad, and it's just this horrifying story about the Iraq War and basically what Iraq is like now with the American military presence and of course the Iraqi people being devastated by the, you know, weapons of mass destruction idea. So they were just super. So I'm still with this agency, and then Norton picked it up, and I had a great experience with them. So to answer that question, or to finish my answer, Noura, I would say that, yeah, it was this feeling of, you know, but we don't really want to hear about a white shooter, because that, you know, we just don't want to focus on that, right? And I understand, you know, I think people think that this book is going to be graphic, and it really isn't. I think it's disturbing just enough in terms of that physical violence. And I didn't want to sensationalize that, you know, I didn't want to be disrespectful in terms of victims of hate crimes. And I also, this book was inspired by the real life shootings of Yusor Abu Salha, her husband and her sister in Chapel Hill. So I was very sensitive to that. So otherwise, I would say this book has been embraced, Noura, you know, in really wonderful ways. So I have received just messages of love from my immediate communities like this, but then also from readers who just don't know other Muslims, or, you know, do, but have not gotten close, have not been exposed to Muslim writers or Muslim art. And I'm so heartened. So I can take those negative experiences and learn from them and continue to, you know, be empowered also. But the response has been terrific. So I feel really also empowered, you know, in that sense. I won't say that, you know, I stopped even using phrases like, oh, but these agents champion the story. I'm like, champion? Why can't my story be, right, the same as anybody else's story? And what I mean is the white narrative, right? And the writers who are not asked the same questions that I typically am, you know? So I hope that answers that.
That answers it beautifully. And thank you so much, just on behalf of myself and the people listening, for sticking to your guns. I mean, pun intended, I suppose, but for really just standing your ground and finding a publishing company that would take your story without you having to change your narrative as an author. So that really is beautiful and insightful. So my next question to you, Sahar, is what has the process been like to get published in general? Were there any unethical practices or things that surprised you perhaps? Or like you said, was it just finding the right one and then them embracing you and taking it off and taking off from there?
I thought this was such a great question. I was in the Palestine Rights Festival, which happened in December, and it was just amazing. We should have met in New York, but because of the pandemic, but this allowed people from all over the world to attend. And I was just a listener, a participant in a panel. And the Arab writers there were just talking about the pushback that they receive in terms of representation. And you know, there was one writer who said something about, well, you know, it's not all bad. Or she made the statement about us having to sort of accept, you know, somebody else, you know, editing our visions and our manuscripts. And I felt sort of stung by that, because I thought it's bad enough that, you know, the publishing industry is perpetuating, you know, certain narratives, but for writers who are like myself, not pushing back, you know what I mean? So, but I have to say, you guys, it's not courage. I've also learned from a lot of writers who paved the way for me. And I've listened all along, and I sort of was preparing myself. I'll say this, Nura, I'll give one incident, because I just, you know, I was talking a lot about having to find the right publisher. But even within this publishing industry, there was an incident of, you know, wanting to choose a venue and sort of dress it up like Aladdin when I was going to meet press, you know, and I have to say, I was appalled. And we can laugh. We're like, and you think it's a joke, right, Nuda? You're like, no. And I swear to God, it's this thing of, but they had good intentions. That's not what they meant. But it's that microaggressive behavior, you know, and sometimes that can be just as dangerous as the person who spits at me, you know, if I were visibly hijabi. Quite honestly, you know, I feel safer than other Muslim women because I'm not, you know, visibly hijabi. So I know my privilege in that regard. But it's those microaggressions, right? And I hope come through in the book, because if you haven't read the story, I go all the way back, you know, to when she is a child in the 70s. And what people have told me, I've heard two things. Wow, I remember that, but then we've internalized so many things. I think my daughter's generation, I have 2 adult daughters now, and of course, young people in this space too. I think you are, you know, you have done so much more work in being visible and celebrating, you know, who you are. And then also appreciating multiple identities. You're not just Muslim, right? You're not just, you know, this one thing, and that's constantly evolving. But I'm from Afaf's generation, and we put up with a lot, even from teachers, you know, people who were supposed to advocate for us, who we were supposed to trust. So I'm glad to say that The Beauty of Your Face is a book that absolutely reflects my original vision. I had great editing. In fact, my white editor said, you know what, Sahar, we need to cut down the shooter scenes, in the sense that it's Afaf's story. So we don't want to stay away from hers. And I have to say, in some of the early reviews, that's what some readers said. They're like, they would have gladly have done away with, you know, him. But the purpose was a very deliberate disruption and a daily threat that I was trying to convey there. So I wanted to step away from Afaf and remind my audience that, but there's still that threat, you know, and that bigotry and that hatred and that fear. But I do appreciate the way it was finally executed in the final manuscript.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's so interesting to see how in the book, it seems you know, for like how you said your generation and her generation, Afaf, in the book, it's more blatant, right? People are not really tiptoeing around it. But you, as trying to get published, or, you know, even having a theme or trying to make events, it's more microaggression. So it's seeing that it's not just one way. Sometimes it's very obvious, sometimes it's more unintentional or ignorant, and people just have to be sometimes taught or brought to their attention, and it's not always something malicious. So that's good to keep in mind, because I think sometimes people, without thinking, might believe, oh, this person has the worst intentions. But that's beautiful that you can write the experiences of Afaf in the book that were more blatant, but also say, you know, things have changed and evolved, and it's not so blatant all the time. There are people who mean well.
Yeah, and of course, readers who are not Muslim who are picking up the book. I mean,
Right.
that you know, writing is an act of empathy, but then also reading is. So I think, you know, having dialogues like these are so great, because, you know, books allow us to enter into a space without all our defenses. I think that's what I love about fiction, reading it and then also writing it. And I agree, Noura. I wish that we could start earlier. I'm also a teacher. I'm a high school teacher, and I know you're doing that kind of education, but I think that's like a societal shift, right? And just normalizing, you know, all the different, you know, people and the identities that we carry, for sure.
Definitely. And thank you for helping pave that path for us. The next question I have for you is, what inspired you to become an author? And also, with becoming an author, what inspired you to write about Muslim issues over other topics? Because obviously both those things can be vast.
Yeah. So, you know, I feel like I've always been a writer in the sense of, you know, being a big reader first, and then communicating well in the written space. But that was mostly academic. It was mostly maybe like personal essays. So I wasn't venturing into fiction until actually I started teaching. But I never thought I'd have a professional career. And I think that's because I didn't see other writers like me. So it was one of those things too, where again, I was brought up with the canon, and it doesn't mean that I didn't love, you know, many white authors, but I didn't think that people would want to read me. So who would be interested, right? In an Arab American, a Muslim American writer. So I feel also like I'm kind of a late bloomer. I've taught more than I've written, but they've now, you know, sort of coincided, and I'm in a really great place now to pursue both. And I tell my students that you can cultivate as many lives, you know, as you want. So I guess, you know what, it was one of these things that maybe I didn't think about even consciously, but I was writing stories that I wish I could have read, you know? So it was like, and how many of us have heard this too? This idea of we're writing the books that we wish were already out there and in our libraries. I did receive actually one beautiful message from a reader who said that. She's like, this is the book that I wish was in my high school library, that I could have, you know, checked out. And that just, you know, meant the world to me. And I said, yeah, I would say that many of the Muslim writers that I know, we have the same answer, you know, in terms of representation and wanting to put more stories out there for, you know, this generation, and then to also validate like my generation and our experiences. So I think that was definitely the driving force. You know, I finally realize I do have, you know, many stories that I'd love to share. And of course, you know, many of them are fueled by personal experiences, not necessarily autobiographical, but stories and experiences, you know, within my community, within my family, you know, my circles, but everything is fictionalized. Although in this book, my sisters were like, is this so-and-so? And I'm like, read that disclaimer. You know, there are no, any, you know, characters that appear to be based on real life are purely fictional. Well, just kidding. But for the most part, they were identifying with a lot of characters who were just amalgams for different people in our lives. So yeah, so hopefully I answered that. You know, I know it's many things, but it's mostly that, just wanting to put the stories out there that I was craving.
I think that is something so powerful and needs to be highlighted again. You just weren't complaining about it or saying, oh, we have a gap or this is missing from our society. You looked at it and you said, I have the passion for it. I have the will to do it. So why not be the change that I want to see? So let me write these books that I wish I had in my generation or when I was growing up. So thank you for doing that. And also, I just want to go ahead and touch upon that. I am doing the Q&A now, but I will open it up towards the end. If any of the audience member have any questions, you're more than welcome to drop the questions in the chat for everyone to see, or you can message me privately. And if you want to remain anonymous, so it's completely up to you. And also just a quick reminder, we would love to see your beautiful faces. But again, if you're at work or school and trying to multitask, that's fine. But if you could turn on your cameras and you're comfortable, we would love to see that too. And thank you to everyone who has. Sahar, diving into the next question, this is more related to the book now. So why was Afaf's relationship with her mother extremely cold? Was that to reflect something within our culture? Was it something that perhaps you experienced in your personal life or saw a lot of people dealing with? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Another really interesting question. And again, readers who I've connected with in book clubs and things like that are split in terms of sympathizing, you know, with the mom, with Muntaha, Mama, or, you know, just feeling like, you know, she just sort of neglected these kids and they couldn't forgive that. And I completely understand that. But you know what, Nuda, I don't know about it being cold. I feel like the mental health issue is really what is, you know, at play here. And I wanted to touch upon it without being, you know, sort of like, and, you know, here's another issue that, you know, our community deals with. And I definitely didn't want to present it as something that's taboo, but we're talking about the 70s, then into the 80s. I mean, even, you know, like these kinds of social services were just not even available, right? I think for a lot of us, and I'm thinking of my parents, it was actually the masjid, the mosque, that would have been the place. And then you would go and talk to other people in your congregation, or you would talk to the imam. But with Muntaha, that coldness is really, to me, her being a broken person. So I know, again, and I think what I love about fiction is I'm not justifying, I'm trying to understand, you know, where characters are coming from. So again, I understand when people have a very strong reaction to her, but I think they can see where the fracture started and then how it just, you know, split her. And we know immediately, without giving anything away, it begins with her older daughter disappearing, her firstborn. So it doesn't, again, forgive that treatment. You know, you describe it as cold, but she was, believe it or not, the most difficult character to write. Even, you know, people think it's a shooter, and he wasn't. It was Muntaha. And it was because I was trying to present her as this, you know, complicated, grief-stricken mother, you know. And yeah, I think, again, that took a toll on her relationship with Afaf. But I think we also come to see that this book is about forgiveness, you know, and Afaf having to forgive herself. We see, but then also to forgive others. And her mom is, you know, part of that experience. So what is, yeah, even cruel at times, you know, I would describe Muntaha's behavior. I hope that people can see there are a few things going on here, and a big part is her mental health just starts to deteriorate, and she just can't be the mom that she wants to be, that I imagine her wanting to be, you know, to the children who are still there, Afaf and her brother Majid.
Well, that's definitely a lot of insight for me as well, because like you said, when I was reading it, I just felt, wow, like she's so cold to Afaf, and a little, she's not as cold to Majid, I felt, but you're right. It's almost like sometimes we just put people in these boxes and we don't look at the whole picture. She's dealing with things with her husband. She's dealing with things in her society and in her marriage. And there's so many layers to it. But sometimes we just say, oh, well, how can she interact with her kids this way? Or how could she say this or not say this? So I think that's really amazing that you unfold that and you unpack it. People are onions, and there's a lot of layers to go back. She's not just a cold mom. There's a lot of things that contribute to that. And sometimes you can't be better if you don't know better. One of my favorite quotes is adults most of the time are just broken children walking around in adult bodies. So if she didn't know how to heal herself and didn't know how to address the things within her, or didn't see anything different growing up, she might not know what to do as a mom, or how she should be, or fight her mental health, because that is really hard. So I really appreciate you unpacking that, because I just wrote it off like, wow, she's really cold. But you're right, if you read the book, you do see that's contributed to by a lot of different things. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So
and I think it challenges too, like our notions of what of being a mother. But then I think the tropes around Arab mothers and Muslim mothers, and the extremes that we see, like the battered mother, the saintly, and I wanted to create nuanced women, and whatever Afaf lacked from her mother, we see other women characters, and I loved writing all of them, and I said Muntaha was the most challenging, but I hope I showed an array, and that we are not just a kind of woman, and those terrible stereotypes of Arab and Muslim women.
Yeah, that's true. And look, I was subject to it. I'm Muslim, and I'm a woman, and I'm Palestinian, but I still didn't completely understand the layers of Muntaha. So, it just goes to show sometimes you need to gain insight from another perspective, or just maybe have a different take on things. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. Just kind of segueing into the next question then, you talk about the mother's mental health in the book, The Beauty of Your Face. So can you please touch upon how you think it's handled within the Muslim community? I know you already kind of talked about it. So maybe discuss how it was more in that time frame, like the 70s and the 80s, and maybe see how it's handled now. Do you see a shift? Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely do. And I'm really proud to share that. My cousin is in the mental health industry, and my daughter is a social worker. So I think, we have really just embraced mental health services, and, have acknowledged that it's okay, and it's not a sign of weakness. That's not to say that, everybody, is on board, but I know that at least in Chicagoland, here in Illinois, we have, really strong services that are coming from Arab American agencies. And I'm just so heartened and happy, to see that those services are available, and that, members of my community are actually using them. So with Afaf, 70s, 80s, I don't think we were quite there yet. I think we've definitely shifted. So I like to think that I sort of gave a, realistic, but we also know in the book that they never said the word mental health, right? So they didn't have the language really to even, to deal with it, to address it. But I do think, Noura, we have definitely, come a long way. And I think, if we are not treating, those mental health issues, we won't be able to thrive. We should treat them just as we would any physical, disorder or ailment. And I like to even keep up with what is happening in occupied Palestine, and the services that happen there. And even, things like domestic violence. In fact, I'm working on a project that addresses that. So things that are taboo are no longer, or, we are taking them on, and in these really extraordinary ways. And I'm grateful for the work of people who are picking up that charge.
I'm grateful too, because I know even within my family, it was like, oh, you don't need a therapist. You're not crazy. I'm not crazy. So I'm really glad the conversations are starting to change little by little. And it's not necessarily this stigma. I mean, it still exists for sure, but I've noticed it's starting to inch on this way of, okay, maybe needing help or talking through things or discussing my feelings isn't crazy. It isn't just for people who are quote unquote broken, because, you know, we all have some sort of trauma or baggage that we're carrying, whether it's big or small.
And my cousin, I'm sorry, Nuda, just to round off that point, she focuses on what mental health counseling should look like for young Arab American students. So she's in a college setting. And to me, that just, wow. So we're studying that, you know, and we're making sure that like people outside of our immediate communities know how to help those students cope. So just really terrific things. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, when you know better, you do better. So I'm so thankful for people like your cousin.
The work is being done.
Yeah, that work. Exactly. So the next question I want to ask is, what inspired you to write about a terrorist attack on an all-Muslim girls' school?
So, you know, I mentioned earlier the tragic inspiration of those 3 young people in Chapel Hill. I think I've always been also interested in school violence, but I've written about gun violence, a child bringing a gun to school, but this was different. So, I mean, this was based on bigotry, based on hate. So I knew I was going to be delving in a completely different realm, and that it would be frightening. But I wanted to address something that is very much still, you know, I think a present danger. And I was trying to get at the hate crimes that have also been surging, and we know this since the beginning of the Trump administration, but also since 9/11. But I wanted to go back even further, as has been mentioned, you know, to the 1970s, where we can see how a single person, you know, all the experiences of being Muslim in this country and, you know, being Arab in this country. So it started, you know, there, and then it took off, and then we discover that there's a whole life and an extraordinary and a beautiful, and it's up and down, and it's difficult, and she's challenged. But again, I didn't want to get away from what we've been seeing in terms of Islamophobia, which I love, you know, what you were saying earlier when you were talking about the mission. I hate the word Islamophobia, right? Even that word is problematic, right? In terms of just how, you know, othered we are, and made, you know, to be, you know, something that is to be feared in really irrational ways, right? So I know we need the word to have conversations, I get it, but as soon as that word appeared, I cringe, you know, but I use it, you know, because again, this is in the discourse. So yeah, I guess I also wanted to explore, when does the hate start? You know, when does that bigotry start to foment? Which is why taking on the shooter's point of view, as limited as it was enlightening for me, even though he's a fictional character, because I also did research. That's not to say that there's, again, any excuse or justifying it, but he was a human being who was radicalized. So let's look at that. And again, let's look at all the stories and all the forces that have carried us to these critical moments in time, to events that we just saw unfold last week. You know, I feel like, you know, this book becomes timely over and over again, right? In terms of, you know, the kind of fear stoking, right? And hate mongering that happens, that I'm so worried that if we don't address it again with our younger people, we're not going to, you know, break, you know, the cycles of white supremacy and patriarchy, you know, that someone like Donald Trump just, you know, ratchet it up, you know.
Thank you, Sahar. And that's a good point too, is that terrorism is not a single person or a faith or a profile. It is an ideology. And once you address the ideology of this radicalized person, whatever those thoughts or ideas may be, that's how you undo terrorism.
Yeah.
It doesn't belong to one specific person or thing. So thank you for touching on that. The next question that I want to ask is, what has your experience been talking to Muslim youth on book tours? I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if you've done physical tours where you just go to a space and see people firsthand. I could be wrong. But on your book tours, what have you seen from talking to Muslim youth, even virtually when you talk about the book with them? And do you see any of their fears reflected?
So it's been virtual all the way. Yeah. It'll be incredible to actually be with readers soon. But can I say, the pandemic, for all its cruelty, it I think really allowed me to expand my reach with this book. So I've been in conversations with book clubs and panels like all over the world. So that has been just amazing. And I'm so grateful for that. Yeah. And so when people are like, oh, it's too bad it came out, I'm like, ooh, I think, yeah, I think I've connected, in ways that I might not have. It might've been a quieter, tour. So it's been a mixed Noura. So I haven't had just a straight youth, group, but I have communicated in different ways. I'll say this, when I'm with, sort of like an exclusively Muslim group, and I'm actually going to be in one coming up next month. So I just have been loving the faith-based ones. I'm doing an interfaith. I'm doing Muslim. I'm actually doing one with a synagogue next week in San Diego. So talk about the reach, right? People who just keep inviting me, into their spaces. But for Muslim readers, their messages have been the most touching. And I'll say, I've been so worried about how this book was going to be embraced by my immediate community. So I say that always in spaces like this. I was worried about, quote, getting it right. So to get messages, and I swear, you guys, this is not to brag, I get messages still every single day from people. So people who are tagging me, people who are emailing me. I got one from a French student who then gave this book to, her teacher. But it's those Muslim readers who say, thank you. Finally, the representation is authentic. And here's a narrative about a woman who embraces Islam, is not like running away and I hate my parents, they won't let me be American. It wasn't that kind of book that I was interested in writing anyways. We do get a sense of that experience, and I want to also honor it. Like, I'm thinking of being a child of the 70s and the struggle to assimilate, which is a failed experiment because it's like a one-way. It's like, we need to, enter into the space, and you're demanding that we drop everything. So it really is not like a two-way street when we talk about assimilation. And that I feel has really shifted and is beautiful. So I just felt just incredibly affirmed and validated, to put out a book that Muslims were seeing themselves in and represented, again, as in this authentic way, which I feel like, oh, good. So I got it. And that makes it the most successful, is them seeing themselves, and then readers who are not Muslim getting close, to this community in meaningful ways, for sure. But then also feeling, I received a few messages about, I feel horrible, like I had no idea, like those kinds of messages, especially when Afaf gets to the post 9/11 experience. I had a very close white classmate of mine from high school who sent me a message, and I get goosebumps because she was just in tears, when she was reading those parts, because, how could she know, right? I mean, that, because, we're not able to tell these stories, and we're not able to have these conversations. So I think on so many levels, but those being in front of Muslim readers and audiences has just been amazing, Noura. I've just really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I know. I definitely have enjoyed it myself. And I'm not surprised you're still getting messages, because I'm trying to share this book with everybody and anybody that I know. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Definitely
Thank you.
so happy that we're able to extend your reach. And you're right, there are a lot of things that have changed, but who knows, maybe we wouldn't even have this partnership if it wasn't for everything going virtual. And it's just crazy how things line up. I don't think it's a coincidence, but I'm very thankful that you looked at other avenues to share your book and your story. So thank you. The next question that I want to ask is, how do you feel terrorism is portrayed in Muslim communities when it happens to a Muslim community versus when terrorism happens in white communities, to white communities?
So you mean sort of like the Muslim on Muslim violence? Is that the first part of that, Nuda? Or I'm sorry, I might have misunderstood.
No, you're fine.
Or,
I'm sure that was super confusing. So I mean, how the shooting happened at the Nurrideen School for girls. So when a terrorist attack happens to Muslims,
I'm sorry, it's the reverse.
Versus when a terrorist attack happens to white communities.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of, I don't know if there's any other books that address like the white domestic terrorists the way I do here. So this might be, a new kind of American story. So and that has been a whole interesting experience when people, ask me, so do you think this will be in curriculum? I'm like, yeah, I think it should be like in American lit classes. I do. I think it should be in contemporary because, the new American, right? We are, we've always been here, but now, our stories are getting into the mainstream, and we're raising one another's voices. But I will say, so in terms of fiction, again, those still might be limited, at least in my reading experience, but we know that they hit the headlines with much greater speed, right? So we know that the Muslim terrorists, that the person's going to be identified almost immediately. There's not going to be any sort of equivocating about there being a mental health issue, this person had problems. It's always that ideology, right, of fanaticism. We don't get, again, any sort of, hesitation about even calling a white domestic terrorist or even, white hate crimes. I think it took a long time before, in my opinion, a few years before they even called the Chapel Hill shootings and sort of elevated it to a hate crime. And I was glad to see that. I'm sure that was just a vindication for the families. So I think it's problematic, Nuda, to answer your question in general, that no, I think those stories are told differently and told sensationally. And we as a community suffer that, right? Because that's they're not going to see anything past that, right? And I think that's what this book does is, the characters are humanized, and they're three-dimensional, and they are not just hijabi women, right? I mean, these are living, breathing human beings who turn to faith, whose faith might be challenged, even by themselves, by the larger community. So yeah, I definitely think that there's a different delivery and execution, and then more space given to the sensationalized Muslim attacks. I'm always so disheartened too. I was watching something on Netflix, and then I had to stop because one of the plot lines was like a bombing in a fictionalized area in New York, and I really thought they were going to go another way. And they didn't. And so they immediately identified, and I thought, ooh, let's just keep inflating that story when we're dealing with a horrible, horrible white supremacist administration that, thank goodness, is going to be over. But we know it won't be over still. And I hate to sound hopeless, but I think that's where we're at. I feel hope in other ways, but that narrative is convenient. It's convenient for foreign policy. It's been destructive for decades, if not, for centuries when we think about just Orientalism, right, of the East.
Yeah, something really interesting that you touched upon was that it's not going to go away, right? It's not going to go away if you just say, oh, this is bad, or punish people, whatever the case may be. Again, it ties back to the way people think and the ideology that drives them to behave a certain way. So a lot of work to do, but thank goodness people like you are starting to have the conversation within books. There's different roles being taken in movies or in shows. So hopefully inch by inch, the pendulum will go towards the middle somehow, but sometimes we see those swings, right?
Yeah,
so
for sure.
yeah, so hopefully the ideology will change. So I know we're coming up towards the end here. We have about a half an hour. I have a couple more questions. So again, I would want to invite everybody who is in the event, get your questions ready. You're more than welcome to unmute yourself once I ask the audience for questions, or you can message me privately, or even just drop it in the group chat, as some of the people have done on the side. So the next question that I have for you, Sahar, is going back to that passage that you read when we first started the event. What significance do you want readers to understand when referencing the trip to Hajj?
Yeah, I love this question, and I deliberately chose that passage. When I had a sense that you might be asking me about that section. I wanted to convey to the audience how something as beautiful as Hajj, was just sort of devastated by this 9/11, post 9/11 experience, and how even that religious pilgrimage and all the rituals and ceremonies, they're just not celebrated and upheld in this country the way other, religious events and, celebrations and holidays. And so I was deliberately playing on, here is Hajj, which is supposed to be spiritual, but it's been sort of, blackened because of 9/11. But not to give too much away, Afaf still has, this beautiful experience. So Hajj to me, believe it or not, was also, it was actually more, it was the most research I had to do. So even more than the shooter, which I avoided doing with the shooter first, because I wanted to develop him. I wanted to, see my character first. It was Hajj that I had to do research, and I found beautiful blogs, journals by women who did the day-to-day. And I was just so, struck by that. So for me, all the stories that I've heard from relatives, from friends who've done the pilgrimage, they've just been amazing and extraordinary. And I won't ever really know until I do it myself, if I ever get that opportunity. So me having to imagine it, I was actually quite frankly worried about that. And, hearing from, people saying that's not how, it goes. It's actually, but, it wasn't anything like that. And I know it was, it continues to evolve. And even now I think it was virtual, right? Because of the pandemic. So Hajj to me felt like an ironic way of also presenting the 9/11 experience at that point. So something that villainized Muslims, but then she goes to this other place where she feels like she belongs, and that was not, she was not robbed of that. And that felt, pretty good. And I just wanted to show that juxtaposition of O'Hare and the horrible experience there, and then going to this other place where, is unlike anything, even, giving birth, as I wrote it. So.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for going into that. The next question I have is, how have your experiences living in Palestine influenced your writing with this book, or maybe some other writings?
Yeah. I think my Palestinian experience and that identity, I feel like that is more in the forefront in my short story collection, and I think is going to be more distinct in some of the projects I'm working on now. I feel like this feels definitely like a Muslim American, experience, which I really treasure. But the Palestinian facet of that, I think, is really important because that's also what sort of breaks Muntaha, and it also defines her father, Baba, right, Mahmoud. So they bring those experiences of Palestine, and her and the mother not being able to get back to it is really important as someone who just never felt like she belonged, you know, in the United States. But I think I was also playing to the sense of placelessness that Afaf experiences, so not belonging, and that is very much the Palestinian experience and living in the diaspora, and I really love exploring that. So that shows up in my other work. So I think. Maybe also, Noura, you know, in talking to you about this, maybe this made it easier to publish because it wasn't, quote, political, right, in that regard. So I'm curious to see how, you know, future work is going to be embraced, things that I'm working on now. I don't think I've deviated, and I certainly don't shy away from it. I give the background of her parents, and especially Afaf's father, who are basically driven off their property in Haifa, you know, by the settlers who've arrived, you know, from Europe. And so that is, you know, in a nutshell, absolutely what informs, you know, my writing. And I embrace it in all of its beautiful and still challenging ways, because it's such a fraught identity. You say Palestinian and it's like, and now we're getting into really interesting discourse about if you are, you know, anti-Israel, that means you're anti-Semitic, which is ridiculous, you know, and I say that without, you know, any reservation, and it's so problematic. But you know, I think it serves, you know, Israel and Netanyahu's government. So yeah, I think you know, it's given me so many beautiful stories too. So, you know, the oppression, the occupation is certainly shapes someone like me who never felt comfortable even saying that I was Palestinian, you know, when I was younger, because I was afraid, you know, that it would be identified with plane bombings, you know, and I just think of, you know, TWA, trouble with Arabs, is what I grew up hearing, you know, from people who taunted and teased. So I think fiction has really allowed me to explore all of that and things that I've internalized. And then I think still relating that struggle, but I hope I'm not the only book, obviously, that people read. I say that all the time. You need to read writers like Susan Abul Hawa, who just published a book called Against the Loveless World, which is a nod to James Baldwin and his work. It just won 2 really important prizes, and she's one of the ones who paved the way for me. But that book is just extraordinary. And writers like Susan Muadi Darraj, who's a great friend of mine, and just the poetry of Palestinian writers, and then books in translation. Like, I was so heartened that in addition to my book being noted by the New York Times, Adlana Shibli, her work was translated, and it was also noted as the 100 notable books. And that one takes on the story of a young Bedouin girl who's brutalized by the Israeli military that is, they're basically canvassing. This is 1948 occupation. And I guess I'm always like, wow, they published that, because of, you know, just how silenced and invisible, you know, our community has been in these ways. So we're either, yeah, it just feels like we've always been identified in these extremes. And I hope that my work continues to expand, you know, that narrative. I'm so glad and feel privileged to be part of, you know, those voices.
Yeah, and we appreciate your voice as well. And something that I really appreciated about Afaf is that she wasn't, I say this so many times, but it's true. She was layered. It wasn't just focused on her Palestinian background. It just wasn't focused on her journey with Islam and really truly embracing being a Muslim. It wasn't just about her mom or her dad or the disappearance of her older sister. There were so many things that made up who she was. And I love that, because a lot of times people just try to say, well, this is what you are and this is what you're not, the end. They think they have it figured out. And even just within her character, and not to mention all the other characters, you really can tell that there are different elements that make this person who they are. It isn't just one thing. So I really do appreciate you, like you said, not shying away from her background, but also not making it the center of everything either. There are many.
Saying that.
Yeah, there's a lot of facets to her as a human being, and us as human beings. She may be fictional, but I really related to her. So thank you for that.
My good friend Susan, who I just mentioned, so there's two Susans who I adore. One, and thank you for putting that book in the chat. Susan Moadi Darra, she wrote a middle grade series called Farah Rocks, and it's one of the first books that I've seen where a young Palestinian girl, it's not just about struggle, but it's about joy. And it's something that I'm really conscious of when I think about my I'm in a predominantly Black school. And I grapple with how much do I want to show of the struggle, but then I've been reading so much more about, but there's got to be that balance with joy. And so I love the hashtag, Black joy, Black magic. And I'm just all about that now. And I learned, and I feel like, oh boy, I hope I wasn't damaging. So my friend Susan doing the Farah Rock series, I'm like, that's what we need. And we need balance, and we need, different perspectives. And we need to show that, we do have wonderful, family experiences and experiences with teachers and schools and so on. So there's not the single story,
Yeah, I'll have to look into that as well. It's called Farah Rocks. Is the Farah the name of
I'm
the
going to put
girl?
it in the chat. And I'm sorry, say that again.
Is Farah the name of the girl?
It is. And so she goes by Farah or Farah. And what's great is because Farah means joy.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. I was like, that's so intentional. That's beautiful.
I'm just writing her name in here. And I know, thank you guys for putting the links. And so if you know young readers or teachers of middle grade, please recommend Susan's. It's just so beautiful. And it's gotten a lot of raves. Capstone is a great publishing company too. They really are devoted to marginalized communities and representation and diverse voices.
Yeah, which is so needed. Thank you for sharing that book with us.
Yeah, and she's Christian Palestinian, by the way, which is another layer.
Right.
So it's also this conflation of, if you're Arab, then you're also Muslim, or if you're Muslim, you're Arab, and no, that's not the case, right?
Yeah, which I think is so great to expose people to, right? Because sometimes people just don't simply know. There's a narrative that is perceived or that is seen, and so people just kind of run with that. But like you said, there are Christian Arabs, there are Jewish Arabs, there are so many different things. There were Jews in Palestine even before settlers came. So I think a lot of people don't know that we are Semitic people too, and they are brothers and sisters, and it's not the faith or how they look like that we're against. If anything, Jews are our brothers and sisters and our neighbors, but it's the politics and the government and the way we are treated that is not okay. So I appreciate you diving into that as well. It's more than what's just seen on the surface. So I'm coming up here on our final two questions before I open it up to our audience. So the next question that I want to ask, the next question is, are there any topics that you left out when writing The Beauty of Your Face because of how it would be received? If you did, why did you?
I did not. So I guess I also begin in a place of, here's my vision. I need to stick to it. I need to silence the critics, And so, and I know sometimes I can be my own worst enemy because I worry about, how it will be received. But once I work through that, I really don't censor myself. I think, some of the funny comments from just like close members of my family, they were surprised at maybe some of the scenes that in which Afaf is sexualized, and that's as her, you know, when she's a teenager making just, you know, destructive choices. But you know, we know, you know, that was part of her journey. So I really don't, Noura, and even now as I'm thinking about current projects, I'm also drawn to maybe how even in our own community, you know, we have our issues, we have our challenges, you know, so, you know, what are the things that we are doing that are not so empowering, you know, that we need to address. And so when we think about, for example, mental health or domestic violence and things like that, I'm really attracted to those things. And again, it's just my way of exploring those dynamics. And yeah, and again, I just think it keeps us from being, you know, just two-dimensional and just monolithic. I mean, we're human beings. So no, I can't think of anything that I was super worried about, except the shooter. And you know, I told you all about that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you didn't leave anything out.
Yeah.
So my final question to you before I open it up is, what is one thing that you want readers to take away from reading The Beauty of Your Face?
You know, I think I want them to come away with, you know, Islam is a beautiful religion, and its members are nuanced. You know, they are human. And there are things that are so universal about this book that I've received so many beautiful messages about forgiveness, about, you know, what it means to be a good friend, you know, what it means to not feel like you belong. And those aren't always, you know, necessarily tied to just, you know, your religion, right? And your ethnic background, but it could be, you know, issues of gender, of sexuality, and so on. So I think what I want readers to come away with is a feeling that there was a whole life presented here, and that life, as you said earlier, Noura, like this idea of an onion, and that we as human beings have so many layers. And until you ask that person, where, you know, where have you come from? Where have you been? We're just not going to know that person's journey, and we're only going to see just what seems to be a symbol, a sign of an identity, when we're so much more. And what I mean is like the hijab, right? And that also, you know, being fraught. And, you know, I wish we had more opportunities to tell our stories, you know. I just think, you know, we would just be better, you know, and that is the thing that I work on a lot with my young students, is giving them that space to talk about what I consider origin stories. And that's what I present with Afaf, and even with the shooter. So I would say that, but then I would also want to impress upon readers to please support other writers of color, Muslim writers, because I can't be the last book that you read, you know, that addresses a community like this. So please, you know, support our voices, because if, you know, literature is our humanity. So in addition to the history books, you know, the aliens are going to read our fiction, I hope, right? They're going to study our art. That's where they're going to see what our values were, right? And that's what I hope I could also impress upon audiences. Thank you for reading too. I need to say that over and over. Thank you for picking up this book.
I'm not gonna lie, it's not that I don't like books, but sometimes, you know, you're just like, I want it on audio, I just want to go, or whatever the case may be. But I can honestly say I thoroughly enjoyed this book, and it is a page turner. So that just speaks volumes to the type of book that you wrote. So thank you so much for having something with so much content, and it was dynamic, and I don't know, it's just, it had so many different elements. I just wanted you to keep turning the page and see what was happening next. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so this is the first book of 2021, and hopefully it's not my last.
Oh,
so
right, good, yeah.
So
and definitely definitely check out, you know what, Noura, I think you would really love Susan Abu Hawa, because again, the Palestinian, and she's in, her character's in diaspora in Kuwait, when the Kuwait, when the Iraqi invasion, and then it's this sprawling, incredible. I'm not doing it justice with my gushing. And I wanted to mention, because you said the audio. So my husband had only heard parts of my book, and he's super, God love him. I was like, can you just hear this? I would read parts of it before it became a full manuscript. But then together, he and I heard the audible, and I was lucky because in my contract, I could choose my readers, and she's a Palestinian American, and she founded a theater in New York called the Noor Theater. Speaking of Noura, and so Lamis Ishaq is she. My gosh, I mean, I was crying at parts. So she carried it, and then even the actor who I guess did like shows for Showtime, one that I actually watched, he did The Shooter, and it's incredible. So anybody in the audience right now, I would recommend, I know I've just gone to Audible. Something shifted in my brain when the pandemic happened. I'm finding sometimes it's not easy for me to read off the page. Most of the books that I've read have been Audible, and it's like a theatrical, experience. So I would really urge folks to definitely listen, or at least to sample it to see if you like it. It's so cool.
I'm sure we would love it. I loved just reading it page to page. So, it'd be great in audio as well. So thank you for letting us know.
Sure.
So let me go ahead and do the audience questions now. I'm going to go ahead and read Susan Dyer's question first, and then Mona, I'll hand it over to you, and you can just unmic yourself and ask the question. So Susan asks, well, first of all, she says, this is such a powerful, wonderful book. I loved reading about the immigrant Palestinian experience. I feel it enriches my worldview. Are there any other books by Palestinian writers that you would recommend, other Middle Eastern writers? I know you were mentioning them while we were talking, like the Farah books and some, actually, you said a Christian wrote that one, correct? A Christian?
Yes, Susan is Christian, yes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna type as, so here's what's so amazing. 2020, again, for, all of its, awfulness. There were 6 Palestinian writers who published and launched books. It's amazing. So one that I also really love that expands the narrative is Zena Arafat, You Exist Too Much. You Exist Too Much. And this is about a young Palestinian, also in the diaspora, but she addresses sexuality. So this is, again, a representation that I have not seen a whole lot of. So please check her out too. Beautiful book. And let me see, we mentioned Susan Abu Hawa this year, Susan Muadi Darraj, and I'm going to put in Adana Shibli. She's written other things, but Minor Detail is the one that was part of the notable. And I want to mention George Abraham. So not just novels, but then also poets. So I'm just going for the ones again who, and this is a great one. This one is Birthright, which always makes me think of the birthright trips that young American Jews take, for reclaiming. And so let me see, 1, 2, and then, and then Randa Jarrad, if you don't know her. How many people here have been watching Rami?
Oh yes, I ate up the first 2 seasons like it was nothing.
You're gonna love this, Noura. So if you saw the episode with the Arabi, like the fortune teller, like the one who you go to get like it was for the Sahar, for like the magic. That's Randa, but she is a writer, so she did that was her bit. Oh my God, it was crazy. Wow. Randa has been writing forever, but her memoir comes out February, and it's, oh my God, the title's amazing. Love is an Ex-Country. And when I think again about representation, I know just based on knowing her and then reading the reviews, she addresses domestic violence, body positivity, queerness, and amazing. So, those are just, just a sprinkling. And then I can name other Arab writers who are not Palestinian, but please reach out to me too if you wanna message me. Writers who I absolutely love. I know we're kind of limited, but those are the batch that were featured in 2020. George and we did our launch together, so we're like, F the pandemic, we're still gonna launch, and it was this beautiful, so it was awesome, and he is my brother. It's just been so wonderful knowing, these extraordinary artists and writers.
Thank you.
Somebody put it on me. Yes, on me.
Yes, thank you, Sahar. And thank you so much for the question, Susan. Now I want to move over to Mona Omar. If you want to go ahead and unmic yourself, you're more than welcome to ask your question.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Sahar, for being here. I saw you speak at the Palestine Rights Literature Festival in December. And I had this question saved and I didn't get to ask. So I'm so glad that I had the opportunity.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah. So
wasn't it an amazing event?
It was just so cool, like what they managed to do. Like you felt like you were at an actual festival. So I really enjoyed it. And it was the first time I had heard of your book. And so now we're actually, I started a book club, and our first book we just finished was Against the Love of This World. Yeah, we just talked about it on Monday, and now we're starting your book.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I'll definitely be emailing you for guidance in our discussion. But at the talk that in December, you had mentioned that there was just some difficulties that you had faced in writing it, that it was kind of traumatic and you'd have to close the computer. And I know that you mentioned that the issue of being Palestinian isn't as salient in this book, but obviously like the Muslim American experience is still traumatic nevertheless. And I have this problem, obviously being Palestinian and coming from a Muslim family that was like directly targeted by the FBI. And as I continue to do work on this and my graduate research on this and whatnot, I eventually want to write a book someday, but it is really traumatic every single time I sit down to like study it and get to the nitty gritty. And I'm sure that this applies for any marginalized group, anybody that's inherited intergenerational trauma and continues to experience it every day. So this is not just for the Muslims here, for the Palestinians here, like anyone here who is in these types of marginalized groups can relate to this, where it's like, especially like now being Black in America, like anytime being Black in America, but like you're constantly being faced with this traumatic-ish like experience. So I'm just wondering, like, how do you sit down and write about this and channel this in a way that you can navigate the emotions of it, and so that it can translate into something that's powerful and empowering and maybe even therapeutic for you, but being mindful of what it does on your mental health, because I know it's challenging for a lot of us.
Yeah. And I know, different writers are going to have different, regimens of self-care and that kind of thing. You know what I would say, Muna, I really, I push myself. So, as difficult as some of those scenes were in chapters and even like hearing in the audible, even reading, there were times when I cried, like in certain spaces, just reading certain parts. All I can say is, it's got to get on the page. Like there's got to be that push. And I hope that doesn't sound, too harsh, but it can't, we need to tell these stories. It can't just be aspirational. We can't just think about how great it would be to just write these stories. But I am mindful of what am I appropriating, and I don't want to re-inflict, violence. But I guess if I'm just being true to my craft, to my vision, I feel like that's going to sort of, rise up, on the page. I definitely am aware of, stereotypes, and even if I present them, it's not the only kind of character you're seeing. There are going to be others who offset, but this thing about trauma and dealing with it, I've definitely just, push through in a sort of disciplined way, with making sure that I meet word counts, writing regularly. And those are all sort of practical things, Mona, if that's what you're asking me, or I hope is hopeful meaningful ultimately. But then there are times where you might have to just put it away, even maybe for weeks, you know what I mean? Like a particular project. But I would say, please don't let it go. So for all of that, it's so important that it make it into the world, you know, and I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mona, I would love to read your book. So
Me too.
Definitely keep writing. You have a beautiful
Yeah.
story. You have a story that needs to be told. So thank you, Sahar, for giving us that.
And yeah, and I worry because then somebody else, you know, we've had people for years telling our stories, right? And we don't want that anymore. So
The best person to tell your story is you. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. Thank you so much, Mona, for speaking up and asking Sahara as well. Please, I hope I don't butcher your name. Yael Faidel asks, while in the process of writing your book, did you ever find yourself composing elements of your narrative that would serve your internalized Islamophobia/racism? Or more simply put, did this book also help you unpack Muslim-related issues? She says, or they say, I hope this makes sense.
Oh, it does. This is a great question. I was really concerned foremost with being a Muslim woman who doesn't wear hijab. So again, I thought a lot about, is this my story, you know, to tell? So I did a lot of the unpacking to answer that question, but there was no getting around what I had internalized for years. So I think that it would actually be both. I definitely had to address and explore and attempt to answer both of these questions. I spent a lot of time just listening, and you know, I reached out to Muslim communities, but I felt also grateful for my immediate experiences. So, for example, the chapter, the hijab party chapter, and I'll just leave it at that, I attended those. So that was actually, you know, quite wonderful and fun to write. But the 9/11 and after, and then even where it starts in the beginning, you know, being in a Muslim school, you know, those were all a journey for me. And it was imagination, but then it was exploring things that I experienced firsthand, but then what I imagined, you know, a visibly hijabi or visibly Muslim person would experience. So definitely maybe more unpacking, but definitely addressing first, even maybe my own notions and, you know, ideas of what it's like to go, to move daily in spaces where you are the only person sort of, you know, wearing your religion, you know, quite visibly. I hope that answered that. That's a really good question. So I think I do that with all my work too. So, you know, what is the character struggling with? And is that something that I've struggled with? And how am I going to present it then? And by no means do I have any solutions. I want to make that clear. You know, this is not a book that is supposed to solve any, you know, issues. It you know, really is just a space for me to try to get closer maybe to those answers. And that's why I really say, you know, I push this idea of I can't be the only book that you end up reading, you know. I hope that answered that. And Yael Fidel, that's a beautiful name. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly too.
Yeah, I truly apologize if I butchered your name. Yael, thank you so much for the question. And if you do have a follow-up question or we didn't understand it correctly, please let us know.
Yeah, please. And reach out to me. You know, you can reach me, you know, right on my website and email me. All my information is there.
Thank you, Sahar. And I know we're a little bit past time here at 7:32, but there is another question, and I do want anyone else who has a question to have that chance to ask it real quick, and then we can wrap up. The final question that I have that was submitted to me is from Fidel Villatoro, and he asks, well, he says, thank you so much for this event and book. It has literally moved my heart. During the process of writing this book, what did you learn or discover about yourself? And just just to let you know, Fidel is on the Emerald team as well, and he loves reading books. And so the fact that yours was at the top of his list is speaking volumes, because he loves books and he really prioritized yours.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for that, Fidel. That just warms my heart. I think what I discovered is that I can write for myself. I can write for my immediate community, and I don't need to worry about the white gaze anymore. So that felt like such a burden that I put down with this book, that I'm also seeing, you know, in projects that I'm working on now. And, you know, just, you know, unloading that and not worrying that about, will this be a book that, you know, even everybody's going to love? I'm not concerned. And that might be to my detriment. That might be, you know, maybe I'm not going to be able to make money, you know, and quit, you know, my day job, but I'm not concerned about that. And I say that because as it was going through and I was getting those responses, people rejecting it because of the shooter, I even had family members, people close to me, who I highly respect, who were saying, you know, maybe you should drop it. So if you want to sell this thing, and I just refuse. So, you know, in simpler terms, I don't want to sell out. So I discovered that, you know, I don't need to be afraid, you know, to write what I want to write. And I'm going to keep writing because I love it. Even to go back to what Muna was saying, even when it's hard, you know, and I'm just not going to worry about the economics. And maybe that's a really privileged, you know, response, but this book made it out there. So, you know, and I think it's also because publishing is turning, and it's not just, we're seeing diversity in terms of agents and editors and publishers too. I think we're entering into, you know, just a beautiful, you know, new world for sure. So I hope it answers that. That's a great question. Yeah, I think I stopped worrying, you know, about, and let me just add one more thing. I think about a white female writer whose short stories I love. She wrote an article, I think it was in the New Yorker, that she only wrote thinking of white male editors. So even as a white woman, she saw how problematic that was. And I appreciated that. I said, wow. And so for people of color, there's other layers, right? So yeah, feels good. I feel liberated in that regard.
Thank you for sharing that, Sahar. Great question, Fidel. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, those were all the questions on my end. And yes, Mona, the tide is definitely shifting. So I would like to invite anyone else, if you have a last minute question or something that you would directly like to ask Sahar, you're more than welcome. Does anybody want to unmic themselves and ask a question? If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up the event.
Thank you, everybody who's here. And, you know, I'm sorry, I'm seeing Taha. Like sometimes the grids are, I wanted to thank you too, because I was introduced to Taha also at the beginning of this invitation. So thank you.
Yes. And, oh, I'm sorry to cut you off, Sahar. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I just, you know what, again, just so grateful that you all are spending time, you know, engaging in this book, either just in this conversation. Hopefully you'll be enticed to now pick it up. And if you have read it, thank you. It just means so much. These are my favorite spaces, and I can't tell you, you know, just how thrilled I am when I get the invitations.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and thank you for having a candid discussion with us. And Lynn Terr also says, thank you for standing by your strong beliefs. Even more, thank you for giving us non-Muslims an opportunity to walk a mile in your shoes.
I appreciate that.
And Muna is also inviting everyone who wants to join her book club, since she will be reading The Beauty of Your Face,
awesome.
to go ahead and message her. And I want to give such a big thank you to Willie, to Sahar, to everyone who made this event possible. Taha, he's our director of programming and special projects. He has put in so much work and effort to make this event happen. Ermina also is on here. She's our director of outreach and sponsorship. Fidel, just everyone on our team, on the Utah Humanities team, and Sahar, you, and especially enormous thank you. This event wouldn't happen without you, or you having the courage or just taking the time to say, I'm going to write the story that I want to see. And that's so amazing and powerful. And I thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh, thank you so much. And I love, yeah, I was looking at the question. So Muna, it is opened up to everyone. That's wonderful. And feel free to tag me if you want some other, you know, attention to it. I don't want to overwhelm your book club, and of course, feel free to reach out to me if you need anything. There is a book guide, by the way, folks, if you're looking for one. So I just, if I didn't upload it to my site yet, please just reach out. So thank you all again. Yes.
Yes. And so they can follow you. They can go ahead and look you up on your website, www.saharmustafah.com, correct? Willie, you can also, correct me if I'm wrong, but Utah Humanities has a Facebook page and a presence on Instagram and social media as well. If you would like to follow Emerald Project, we're Emerald Project SLC on Instagram and Emerald Project on Facebook. And yeah, feel free to message any of us if you have any other questions or collaborations that you want to do. But yeah, Yael also says, thank you for this very insightful meeting. I'm excited to start your book, Sahar.
Thank
Oh,
you.
that's so sweet. Thank you so much for joining.
And thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. And Sarah Murphy also, I really appreciate all these beautiful comments. I hope everybody stays safe. And, you know, I think it's extraordinary that we have the inauguration, but ahead of that, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And that just fills me, you know, with so much hope. So I hope that, you know, 2021 is just going to treat us better. And
inshallah, God willing.
Yes, inshallah.
Even when I put inshallah, yes. And Hafa, thank you so much, Sahar. It's always a pleasure hearing you speak. With that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening when you could have been doing everything else or anything else. It really does truly mean a lot to us for you to participate and be involved in this discussion. And I hope everyone has a beautiful night. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
So much.
Assalamu alaikum and goodbye, everyone. Thank you.